You're listening to episode number 42 of the Transform Your Life from the Inside Out podcast. Now, like a couple of weeks ago, I did obviously a transformational story in the podcast, and I'm going to do another one. And this is really an amazing, amazing story to me, and one that I think you're going to enjoy because I talked to Katie, a former student, and I talked to her about how she actually used the power of her mind to heal herself from being on a few medications and to literally heal herself and free herself from anxiety, depression, and panic attacks. So, if you're in any way concerned about health and wellness or you want to stay well for the rest of your life, make sure that you listen. Hi, I'm Jim Fortin, and you're about to start transforming your life from the inside out with this podcast. I'm widely considered the leader in subconscious transformation, and I've coached super achievers all around the world for over 25 years. Here, you're going to find no rah-rah motivation and no hype, because this podcast is a combination of brain science, transformational psychology, and ancient wisdom all rolled into one to take your life to levels you've never thought possible. If you're wanting a lot more in life, to feel better, to heal, to have peace of mind, to feel powerful and alive, and to bring more abundance and prosperity into your life, then this podcast is for you because you're going to start learning how to master your mind and evolve your consciousness. And when you do that, anything you want then becomes possible for you. I'm glad you're here. Okay, so before I visit with Katie and I go into her amazing story, I need to clean something up here. In the last episode, you know how I finish every episode and I say, here's what the next episode is about. I said that Katie was on 6 medications and I was incorrect and I apologize for that. Katie actually told me that she was on 2 medications. As I said, I misunderstood. She was on 2 medications and she also was suffering severely from anxiety, depression, and panic attacks. So even though it wasn't 6 medications and it was 2 with the anxiety, depression, and panic attacks, her story, I think you're going to find, is amazing. So enjoy my interview and my conversation with her. Okay, so today we're visiting in our transformational story. We're visiting with Katie. And Katie actually, and by the way, Katie, this is not a gratuitous promo for TCP, Transformational Coaching Program. What I'm doing with people in this podcast is I'm sharing stories about people that have actually learned new ways to be, new ways to use their mind, new ways to affect their body. Real life stories of people that have actually shifted their life significantly by acquiring more mental skills. So that's the foundation for what we're going to talk about today. So Katie, let me actually share with everyone listening is that Katie went from, how many medications a day were you on when we met?
So I had just stopped my antidepressants right before we met. I'd been on those for several months and I was on my thyroid medication. I have had very low thyroid for most of my 20s for over 7 years. And then I also was on my synthetic hormone medication because I have very low hormone levels for, throughout my 20s as well. So very weirdly low levels for most of my life.
Okay. And let's do this. I just want to lay a frame right now. So what was your physical activity like when we met? Like going to the gym, any of that?
I was not going to the gym at all because I was dealing with a lot of depression and anxiety at the time. I've had panic attacks for several years since high school. And so I started TCP in March of 2018. And in 2017, I had 10 panic attacks, the most I'd ever had in a year. Mm-hmm. And so with the anxiety and depression, anybody who deals with that will know you're just not motivated. Like I would just sit and work. And I wanted to sleep all the time and I was trying to eat healthy, but it was, all I could do. I tried to work out, but I couldn't get into a routine and a habit. I just had no energy. It was just very dark. It felt very heavy.
Okay. So everyone there's, already there are people saying I can relate to that. I've had the anxiety, the panic, the depression, I've been on medication, et cetera. So we're going to dig into that in just a moment because I want to take it apart because I want to talk to you about what strategies you used to get where you are today. And let's go there. Where are you today relative to where you were March 2018?
It's just a totally different life now, Jim. I am no longer on any medication for my hormones or my thyroid. My blood work shows all normal levels. for everything. So my doctors were like, this is crazy. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
So I went off all the medication. I have had one panic attack in the last 18 months. And I go to the gym all the time. I walk. I love to be active. I'm in workout clothes right now because
Yeah.
there's joy in moving my body again. I moved from a very critical mindset about my body for a long time, as many women deal with. I had a lot of, body negativity issues. And so moving into a place mentally of, just kind of loving how I looked and who I am, that made me want to go to the gym and have energy. And it just kind of is this awesome, thing that gets rolling. And it's great now. So it's crazy to be off the medication, but the level of energy I have and, my mental health is so much better. It's
Mm-hmm.
just a whole different life. It's a whole different world.
Okay, so then it's awesome. And I do want to say, just to cover my butt, is I'm not a licensed physician. I have never told you to get off medication, right?
No. And I can add some context there. So I went off of those medications under the supervision of 3 different doctors. So my doctor, my naturopath, and another specialist. I mean, if you've been on hormone meds, you cannot just quit that,
Yeah.
in a day. And so that was a very slow taper, as you know. And, again, it was awesome because it was like, we were looking at everything, what I was eating, my energy, it was all under, team supervision. So you've never said that. That's not something I say either.
Yeah, so let me add here. What you're really saying is that you completely affected your health by doing what? How? Let's take this apart.
So you introduced me to self-hypnosis and to
Mm-hmm.
hypnosis for healing. And so it started with my shift in mental health. So going through the TCP homework, the way that you set it up and the way that you do your coaching, I learned strategies from TCP that made me stop getting into the anxiety.
Let's stop there. So people are listening are like, well, okay, what strategy? So let's take a strategy. What do you think the number one strategy that you learned early on, and then how have you applied that? And then we'll keep on going.
So for me, the biggest one would be the choice versus reaction week. You have a whole module on this. You have a whole week on this for your students.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that yes, I had chemical imbalances, right? I had blood work that was crazy wrong in every direction.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, I had diagnosed issues with depression and anxiety. But I realized in that week, Jim, that I had choice in how I reacted to things in my life.
Mm.
And that lesson is, so then I would use, so the strategy that I would use would
Let's
be
back up. Let's back up.
MTF
Wait. Let's back up. So what choices were you making before you came to that epiphany like, oh my gosh, I do have choice about whether I react to the world or respond? What choices were you making prior that were keeping you ill?
Oh boy, now it's getting personal.
And
No,
we can keep it not so personal, but just
I
like an
know.
example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I realized that I was when people in my life, my family members, people at work would trigger me.
Okay.
I was just reacting. I would get angry, I would get upset,
Mm-hmm.
I would get depressed, and I was just in complete reaction mode. So the other strategy, you asked me to pick one, but it's, if it's everything,
Yeah.
was taking responsibility. So the week in TCP on responsibility also changed my life because I realized I could be responsible for my choices instead of reacting.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I was doing. So when I would get in an argument with my husband, with my family members, with my boss, with people at work, I was always in this constant reaction mode, and I would it would make me anxious. And then I would not set boundaries, and I would just be kind of rolling along, and I'd be angry and then not communicating that I was angry, that I needed
Yeah.
boundaries, and then blaming everybody around me when they didn't know that I needed boundaries, right? It was this whole victim mentality. And the choice versus reaction week, I thought, you know what? I can choose little steps to not get as worked up. I mean, if you've had a panic attack, they're not fun. It's an out of body experience.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I
No, I had them
realized,
years ago, but when I was out of
yeah,
college, I get that. Yeah.
yeah. So, but there's steps that lead up to that where you can choose and go, oh my God, if I hadn't done this, this, and this, I wouldn't have been there.
Yeah, so let's take this apart. And by the way, I'm being more solemn because I'm thinking through this as we're talking here for people, because things that you're saying, I know a lot of people can relate to, even if they haven't been on meds and
Mm-hmm.
antidepressants or et cetera. But what you're saying is that you were completely living, well, not completely, to a large degree, you were living your life emotionally reactive to the world around you, and it wasn't positive.
Correct. Yeah. I was very reactive, and I didn't realize it until TCP. If you had said that I was a victim before TCP, I would have said, no, I'm not. I like read books on growth, and I thought I was a growth, or I mean, I was looking for growth all the time.
Yeah.
And so if you had called me a victim, I would have said, no. But that week on responsibility, I was a victim because I was blaming everybody else for all of my stuff, and just completely reacting to the stress. And then you just get into the mode of, okay, I'm angry, or I'm going to have an extra glass of wine with dinner, or an extra cocktail. And that's the worst thing for anxiety and depression, is to, like, emotionally soothe with food or alcohol, or, whatever it is. And that's what I was doing. And I didn't realize it until TCP.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is most people don't have awareness. And especially when we do that week, and I use the V word, a lot of people actually get angry about that. Don't tell me I'm a victim. I'm not a victim. And you're raising your hand because we're doing video also. And I've been there before many years ago, is that many times we are victims, but no one ever recognizes they're being a victim. And we are victims anytime that we are judging, we're complaining, we're criticizing, we're dealing. It's not my fault. You're the one who did this. It's not my fault that I'm here.
Right.
I would be somewhere else if I had, if I could make a choice, et cetera, et cetera. Or it's, you did it. It's not me. And if you'll stop doing that, I'll stop getting mad.
That was so where I was at. If I was mad at work, it was their fault. If I was mad at my husband, it was his fault, if he's listening to this.
Yeah.
If I was mad because of, family stress or my in-laws or whatever, it was their fault. When in reality, I wasn't communicating. I wasn't being honest. And I would make up boundaries in my head. Like, I remember going, okay, well, this is a line that should not be crossed. But then I wouldn't tell anybody. I wouldn't enforce that boundary. So when it was crossed, I wouldn't do anything. And then I would spin out into anxiety.
Anger.
Anger. Yeah. And it was just this constant loop. And for years, as you know, I've done therapy. I'd done for things over the years. And even for my health, I had seen like alternative doctors. And I was always in that mode of seeking and looking for what would fix me. And it was right there all along.
Yeah. Let me add there for everyone listening. There's something I heard years ago, and I found it to be extremely profound. And you're demonstrating this, and you're helping a lot of people by demonstrating it, is that healthy mind, healthy body.
Yeah. And if I can add there, the other thing, because you asked me at the beginning, and hopefully I'm answering your questions, in a way that's okay, good.
Yeah.
Because you asked me about the strategy. So yes, there was a strategy. It's about responsibility and choice versus reaction, which any TCP alumni will tell you, those are core weeks. The other strategy that I use, other than the actual tools that you gave me, which were the hypnosis, which we can talk about, it was a strategy of labeling myself. So,
wait. So I understand, to make sure. You're using a positive strategy of labeling yourself with a positive story, as opposed to a counterproductive strategy, negative outcome.
Yes.
Okay.
So, because there's also the week on stories in TCP as well.
Yep.
I feel like I know the homework, both
Right.
ways.
Right.
So that week on stories, I realized that. So I'll give you an example. I had always labeled myself as a sick person, because when you have the kind of hormonal issues I had, and again, I mean, I don't mind sharing, I had like menopausal level hormones at 22 years old. And so when you have that, whenever you go into doctors, they're like, okay, well, this is a problem. And like, it's great that you're managing it, but it's like that language of, this is a problem. You're probably always going to have this. If you want to have children, we need to do some testing. If you want to be healthy or get off medication, no, I've had doctors tell me to, increase medication, go off of the natural hormone and thyroid meds. So I was on synthetic for a while, all of that. So I took all of that on, and I was like, I'm a woman that has thyroid and hormone issues, and I'm a woman that is sick. I'm ill.
Yeah. Let's go there for a second. So that's what I call a contextual belief, is that's like an overriding framework belief. I'm a sick person. Because then anything you think will fall within the context of I'm a sick person. Therefore, I can't work out because I'm a sick person. I can't grow my business because I'm a sick person. There's no way I can go hiking because I'm a sick person. I can't feel good because I'm a sick person. Not for you, but other people. I can't be in a relationship because I'm a sick person. So notice those two words, sick person, were a context, and everything else in your life fell in that context. Now, let me keep going here. For all of you listening, what you want to look at is, what context are you working from? Let me go somewhere else here for a second, Katie. And I don't know if you said this, but I had a client one time. It was a man, and he's about 100 pounds overweight. And his contextual belief was, no matter what I do, I cannot lose weight. Now, hang on here. I know you want to answer that. But for people listening, if your contextual belief, which means your framework belief, is no matter what I do, I cannot lose weight, you have already predisposed everything you do to fail. So if you have the belief, and this is one of many, I can't make money, no matter what I do, I can't lose weight, I can't find love, whatever that contextual belief is. So his contextual belief, which I had to bust with him in coaching, is no matter what I do, I can't lose weight. And that's why he hired a trainer, he hired a nutritionist, he did all these things, and he could never lose weight because, like, the grandfather belief on top of that was no matter what I do, nothing works. So he predisposed himself that nothing's going to work. Now, I don't know, because you haven't shared, did you have any experience with that same kind of contextual belief?
Oh, yes. So I had that one as well. And and I also had the belief that no matter what I did, I had an unattractive body. I'm not saying that
Yeah.
to, get compliments or that's not, for years, I would go to the gym because I hated how I looked. And so, when I started TCP, that was, not a great time. But of course, in the years prior, of course, there were times when I'd work out and have, more energy and then less energy. It was kind of this constant thing, right?
Yeah.
And so even in those times when I was working out and going to the gym, it was because, I hated looking in the mirror. In dance classes or group fitness classes, I would stand behind people to not see myself.
Let me add there for a second, Katie, I'm not a hypnotist anymore, but I was many years ago. And this will resonate with a lot of women listening, is women will say, I won't go on vacation because I don't want to wear a bathing suit. I won't take family pictures because I don't want to look at myself in a picture. I won't buy new clothes because I don't want to be reminded of what my weight is. So some of that probably resonates with you.
Oh my gosh. Yes. And it just, none of it was real. And so I had, the weight belief, of course, too. And I have friends who have the same issues or very similar issues, that I have had. And they're always like, well, yeah, I'm going to the gym, but, because of this, thyroid or hormones, it's, it's just going to be a struggle because of who I am or what I am or this thing that I have. And so that's just part of, like, that's just like how we talk as women. Like, okay, yeah, I'm going to the gym, but I just had a baby, or I'm going to the gym and I have PCOS or I have hormone issues, or, and so it's this constant, like, we're going because we don't like how we look.
Okay. Yeah. No. Yeah. I've heard a lot of that over the years being a hypnotist. So what we haven't gotten to yet is, so you started it about your new strategy, but where do you go exactly mentally with a new strategy about shifting the stories? And by the way, take it all apart for people listening. I mean, like, it's like if you've got something in front of you, take all the pieces apart so people listening can say, okay, now I've got tools.
Okay. Yeah. And so I'm trying to think back to when this first started. So it started with stories. It started with a homework assignment that you give in TCP. I won't spoil it for anybody that's interested.
Okay.
But it's very clear what your stories in your brain are. Like, you really become clear of that chatter in your mind. And when I did that exercise, that's when I realized, for the first time in my life, how every single thought was negative about my body, about my health, about me as a person. So the other string of thoughts that I had, we talked about body image.
But hang on. If I'd asked you prior, if I said, are you a negative person? You would have said, absolutely, exactly.
No, because I mean, it sounds weird now. I wasn't. I was a person that was always reading books on personal development, and I was sending books to my friends, and I was telling them to go watch, this Brene Brown YouTube channel. You know what I mean? That was always who I was. I didn't get it. I didn't see it. But the other thing that I was telling myself, so we talked about the body image and the health, and just real quick, when you've dealt with depression and anxiety, and I'm just going to be real here for a second. Yeah. There are moments, especially in panic attacks, when it's an out of body experience, and I would either be physically sick or I'd be really angry, and it'd be like watching somebody else. Yeah. Like literally sick or shaking or not being able to breathe. You start wondering, like, you start labeling yourself as, that word that we all shouldn't use, as a crazy person. There are moments in darkness where you're sitting there like, is this it? Is this who I am forever? Is this me? Because you're watching yourself do this, and it's so deeply disturbing on like a soul level. And I was labeling that too. Like, so when we did this exercise, I was seeing the negative body chatter, which I hadn't really ever noticed, even though it was constant. I'm always going to have these health issues. And then there's these constant thoughts going through my brain of, you're never going to be good enough because you have this dark side. You have this anxiety. You've got this shadow that's always going to be with you. Because that's what people talk about depression and anxiety. Like, it's always going to be there.
Yeah, let me add to give a counterexample for everyone. So Katie said this is where she went, but I had panic attacks and depression and anxiety in 1987 or thereabouts, right out of college. But see, I didn't go to any of those stories.
Right.
Like it's soul crushing or this is soul. What I never went to any of that. Where I went to, and by the way, guys, I actually air quote cured myself without because I didn't have health insurance back then. I was out of college, as I was broke my first year out of school. Uh, but I didn't go to those stories. Where I went to is there's something wrong with me.
Right.
Yeah, that's where I went is what's wrong with me. And then and it was very frustrating for me because I couldn't figure out and I couldn't afford to go see a psychologist. I had no health insurance, had a low paying job out of college. The Texas economy was depressed, which is a whole different story because I was buying into the story, which is all external about the economy being depressed and hard to make money and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, because I bought into the bigger story about the economy, then I didn't have health insurance and I couldn't see a psychologist. And the way that I got out of it is I learned that just haphazard one day is, and actually I had a degree in psychology. You don't learn this stuff in college. You learn book stuff. But I had learned that I could breathe myself out of it. If I got into like a panic attack, the more that I got into the panic attack, the deeper the panic attack got and the harder that it got and the longer it took to recover. But if I would just stop and I would say to, which is called a pattern interrupt, and I would say to myself, wait, you're having a panic attack. It doesn't mean anything. Sit down and start breathing. And when I would do that, I would find that I wouldn't go into the full-blown panic attack. And when I started doing that, within a certain amount of time, the panic attacks went away. So basically what I was doing is training my brain, or my unconscious mind was responding to me, that, you know what, I can actually, if I have a panic attack, which is brain-based or unconscious, I can work myself out of it. But, and you know, I think a lot of people listening can probably relate because I would say a fair amount of people listening have anxiety or social anxiety. They
Right.
might not have the full-blown panic attacks or the anxiety or the depression, but to some degree they have anxiety. So what I want to share with them, and then you can recapitulate here, is that I didn't get on medication. I didn't do any of that. And something I want to say that may be controversial to some people is that if anti-anxiety medication truly worked, then everybody on anti-anxiety medication would have no anxiety. When I have, being a hypnotist for years, I see a lot of people that are used to that were on anti-anxiety, anti-depression medication that still had anxiety and still were depressed. Let me add something else here to help people here, and then back to you, Katie, is that what I recognized is, and I have no idea of your story here or your experience, so we'll see where this goes. What I recognized is that I had this anxiety and depression because of unresolved, unconscious things going on in me. And until I actually resolved those unconscious issues that were coming up, I don't think, I know the anxiety and the depression were my unconscious mind's way of saying, you got a 5 alarm fire going on unconsciously. And until you deal with that 5 alarm fire, we're going to keep giving you depression and anxiety. And when I started dealing with it, it started going away. Now, I don't know if this pertains to you. So is there anything that you can speak to about
Oh,
that?
yes. So the first thing I was thinking is that in my first round of TCP, somebody asked me, because again, I have these labels, constant labels like we have. And somebody
Mm-hmm.
said, well, have you ever thought about what gifts your anxiety and depression have given you? And I
Yeah.
said, what? No, like these are dark, like I like they're curses. I don't like them. I was just kind of perpetuating that story.
Now, hang on
And
right now before you go, and I don't mean to interrupt. So people listening, because I want to pull some stuff out of this.
Yep.
Notice the stories that you even had around the experiences.
Yes.
These are dark places and all this kind of
Right.
stuff. So you had stories which actually made the actual experience even worse based upon the story you're holding.
Yes, and those stories come from judgment from people who, would find out that I had panic attacks or find out that I was on medication, right? It's all judgment, judgment, judgment. And it's just like you said, it's all external stuff. And I was letting those, create stories that were just making it worse. And so
Yeah.
when I sat back and started with the stories that I realized I needed to change, I sat back and started going, I'm healthy. My mind as well. I would say that all the time. I would sit and you can't, we're on video, but I would touch my head and I
Yeah.
would go, my mind as well, my heart as well, my soul as well. I would just start talking to my body, which might seem kind of funny, but I would talk to my heart and my brain. And I would say, we have, it's peaceful. It's peaceful. We're okay. And then just like what you said, the pattern
Well,
interrupt.
hang on. Remember that I don't know if you got it from me, but I told you early on, talk to your body, talk to your
Yes.
thyroid.
Yes.
Okay.
So, and that's another part of it too, is I would sit, again, we're just getting real here. I would sit in the shower and put my hand
Yeah.
on my thyroid, put my hand on my stomach and say, my thyroid is healthy. My hormones are healthy. My hormones are functioning at an optimal level. I would just start doing that, mixed with, of course, the hypnosis tracks on healing. But I also, what you were just talking about that really resonated with me was the pattern interrupt that I learned in TCP. And I don't know if people listening have, know about that yet, but your master thought formula was what I would use to get out of those beginning stages of panic attacks. And that's what I think, to have one panic attack in the last year and a half is crazy for me. And so it was because when I would start to feel it coming on, I would just sit or lay down and go through that. And that was the pattern interrupt because it was moving my attention.
Well, the master thought formula is moving your attention, but it's also, I am not the thoughts. I am the thinker of my thoughts.
And that let me, just the way that was phrased, Jim, it let me sort of stand up and kind of put my shoulders back, if that makes any sense, and say, this is not me. Those dark things that I had felt followed me around since I was a kid, teenager, I was like, these are not me anymore. These were never me. And it let me, and it was just enough detachment to go, oh my God. I get emotional thinking about it.
Yeah.
Because that's what changed.
Yeah. So notice here, everyone listening, is that you said, I don't know the right word. Did you say you had a calm mind or a peaceful mind?
Peaceful mind. I would say my mind as well, my heart as well, my soul as well. And then I'd go through and say peaceful. Okay.
So let's go back. When I said earlier is we look at the word disease, which is dis-ease. So when you went from dis-ease mentally, because I started with, and some people can dismiss this thinking, oh, it's really, that's too simple. No, the body follows the mind. And if you have dis-ease in your mind, even something as simple as stress, where medicine has said that I think 80% or 90%, I know it's at least 80% of illness comes from stress. Stress is nothing more than dis-ease in the mind, and it's nothing more than thought, which, go ahead. You have something?
No. Yeah, I was just going to say that that's what started my journey. So when I started working on the mental health aspect, then I had energy levels to go to the gym. And then I was eating more food and eating healthier food and working out all the time because I thought it was fun. Yeah. And I hadn't been in the gym for probably a year up to that point. Like, again, I'd gone in and out of that up to TCP. And then that's when my doctors said, okay, well, you're doing great. You're feeling great. Let's try to very slowly start off I went off the hormone medication first because I'd been on the synthetic hormones. And then we started that very slowly. And then I just got more and more energy as we went off. And then
notice, I apologize for interrupting. We don't want to add there, but notice what happened is that when you were spiraling counterproductively, you were spiraling counterproductively. When you're spiraling positively, you're spiraling positively, right?
Yep.
So what happens is you went from being counterproductive to neutral. Okay, let's turn this ship around.
Yes.
Then you start feeling better. And as a result of start feeling better or thinking better, whichever comes first for us, actually, we feel like we think. All right. So you think better, you feel better. You feel better, you think better. You think better, you feel better, you do better. And it becomes a very, very positive cycle for you, which has literally moved you 180 degrees away from the direction you were going.
Right. And that's it. And it just continued. And you just said it, the best way, because you're either going in momentum in a bad direction, or you're neutral, or you're spinning positively in the other direction. That's where you're at. It's one of those places. And I was sick of going in kind of that negative direction. And once I realized how good it felt to go positively, I didn't want to stay neutral and tread water anymore. I was like, okay, I'm going to keep doing I was like, okay, I jumped into, learning about the hypnosis for healing and all of that. And then we slowly, because I was doing well off of the hormone medication, my doctors were like, okay, let's go off your thyroid meds. And it was just historic for me because these are the same doctors that put me on the meds years ago. It was about 7.5 years ago. And so they were the ones that were watching this happen, and they were like, this is awesome. This is great.
But Katie, they don't know, because doctors actually will say things like, well, all right, dear, you're going to have this for the rest of your life.
Right. That's what they told me. Yeah. You're going to be on thyroid medication forever. It's going to go up and down. Your doses are going to go up and down. Every time you go up a dose or down a dose, that's a whole other thing. It's a whole mental kind of spin out. And even as we lowered doses over the year, I didn't have any of those.
So because you were using, which is where I want to go, you're using the power of your mind. So let's talk about something that a lot of people are afraid about. And it's crazy that they're afraid about it, but hypnosis. Now, hypnosis was endorsed in 1958 by the American Medical Association. They did subsequently change that endorsement because I don't know why they changed it. I think they changed the criteria or whatever. However, this day and age, the American Psychological, the American Psychiatric, the American Dental, the British Medical
Hmm.
associations, they all endorse the efficacy of self-hypnosis, which we'll talk about what that is. And there is a podcast here, I don't know which episode it is, number 5 or so, about subconscious reprogramming. Harvard, University, Stanford, Yale, Columbia, the Mayo Clinic, they all endorse through research, medical research, and behavioral research, they endorse the efficacy of self-hypnosis. A lot of people are afraid of that word hypnosis because they think that somebody can control them, which we'll talk about, Katie, is not true. And she's nodding her head no, that's not true. Literally, why don't we just call it the power of the mind? So you used the power of your mind to heal yourself.
Yes. And I think that there's kind of a negative stigma to it because, of movies and, stuff you
Right.
see and circus tricks and all of that. It's not like that at all. I mean, I was using, actual medical hypnosis tracks
Yep.
to do this. And I've used it now for everything. I've used it for for my anxiety, for my depression, for healing, for, energy. And there's so much research on it. Once I kind of was tipped down that road. And of course you teach a lot about, self-hypnosis, which was my
Mm-hmm.
starting point.
Yeah.
And it changes you. I can't explain it. You just did a much better job of explaining it, but it changes you at this identity level that you can't really get to in talk therapy. Because I have
Yeah.
done that. I've done a lot of
Yeah.
that. And yes, it's been helpful and it's always great to be aware of your stuff, but this got to stuff that I didn't even know was there. It's like a secret weapon. I can't really explain it.
Yeah, let me add there. And you know what? The thing about this podcast is you're going to get controversy no matter what you do when you're out in the public. You know that.
Right.
And the reality is I will have somebody send me an email, and I'm not bashing traditional talk therapy. One of my coaches, though, has a PhD, so she said this, not me. So if you want to send her some hate mail, send it to her, not me. But she said traditional talk therapy doesn't work. Now, something you said, Katie, which I agree with, is if you want to become more aware, then it helps. However, I remember, years ago when I was doing hypnotherapy, a woman sat in my chair and she goes, Jim, I have been in therapy for 10 years and I can tell you everything that's wrong with me diagnostically, but you know what? I don't feel any better. And
Right.
until you deal with whatever it is, emotional or physical or physiological or neurological, until you deal with that unconsciously, the problem does not go away, which you've demonstrated. So,
Right. And I think so, and that was the main tool. So I started out using the self-hypnosis, which you teach in TCP, and then moved to, researching, hypnosis tracks
mhm,
for medical, stuff. And
yeah,
so much research on it. There's so much research. There's so many different things that you can do that have been
yeah,
proven to work for others. It's not like you're just jumping into kind of a black hole. There's a lot of
right.
proven stuff out there. And then it was, in TCP, we have our 90-day journals that we use for every round that we go through. So then it was journaling. So it was journaling those news stories until they were in printed. So it was every day going, here's my news stories about my health, my identity, my mental health, me as a person, me as a wife, me as a partner, me at work, right? All these different things. And then it was, the tools that we learned through the other weeks in TCP, through the responsibility weeks and the, choice versus reaction weeks. It was sort of that whole system combined. That's what started it.
Yeah,
And
and
I'm still doing it, as you know.
yeah, no, absolutely. And let me add here for people listening is that there's also an element of identity that precedes everything that you did, is you did the work. You did the work. And a lot of us don't want to do the work. And that's a matter of identity also. Am I going to quit early? Am I going to give up? Am I going to take the easy way? And I don't know what your stories were as you were doing the work, but you did the work and completely, in a matter of a year, completely transformed your life. Specifically, because in the program, which we're not pitching right now, I want everyone to understand that, but in the program, it's only 12 weeks long. And as Katie knows, a lot of people repeat multiple times because it's like peeling back a layer of an onion.
Right.
But what you did is you stayed in the work for you and you stayed consistent with it. And that's where we reprogram the mind long-term for life. And that's where we develop the long-term skill set, is taking it and working with it, which is exactly what you did.
Yeah. And it's amazing to look at my life now versus then. Cause the other piece of this is a small piece, but I didn't have my own business at the time. Now I do. That's a whole other thing that's changed. So it's like
Yeah.
everything's changed. And there were stories about that too. Oh, I can't do this. I can't make money doing this. All of that, none of that's real. And, yeah, there were stories in the middle of it of, oh gosh, this is hard. I don't want to do this some days, but it was just, biting the bullet, being a big girl and doing the effing work
Yeah.
and just
Yeah.
still going, and I'm still a student and I still have goals. I still have goals with my health and my fitness and all of that. But it's completely different when you're detached from those stories and detached from those thoughts, like we learned how to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then you're not trapped by those definitions that other people have put on you or that you've put on yourself that you're living in for years or decades that are like invisible chains that are just holding you back. It's like, those are off now. So yeah,
Okay.
there's more work
Yeah.
to do, but it's completely different when you're doing it as a person without chains on.
Okay. Yeah, no, absolutely. So you freed yourself. So let me ask you this. There are obviously a lot of women that follow the podcast. I mean, 80% of people who enroll in my program are women. What stories, and you being a woman and hanging out with the girls and everything else, what do you think the most prevalent counterproductive stories are that women tell themselves?
We're not good enough. We're not beautiful enough. I have a lot of friends who are moms. I don't have children yet, but my mom friends are constantly questioning their ability to be good moms. And I'm on the outside going, you guys are amazing and you're doing amazing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's so easy when you're on the outside. So yeah, self-worth, I'm not good enough. I'm fat, the F word,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's this
Yeah.
whole thing about beauty I didn't expect to work on TCP about beauty. And there've been times when it's been embarrassing to even say that when people are like, wow, that was a big deal for you. And I was like, yeah, I mean, that was a huge deal for me. You know more about that because I've talked to you about it, but I wasn't expecting to work on that. I came in to work on business or health or whatever.
Yeah.
And so there were so many, I uncovered the story of I'm ugly. I need to be better, or I have, I'm imperfect. So, everything around self-worth and appearance, and then also things that we can't do it or we can't ask for it. Right. And I think a lot of, because you asked about women, and I'm saying I don't hear a lot of my guy friends with those same questions of, should I ask for that raise? Should I start my own business? Should I charge for this? Because I didn't think I could charge for what I do in my business now a year ago.
Yeah, let me add there. Men have the same amount of stories, but different stories.
Different stories. Yes.
Will I be a good father? Can I support my family? Are we going to make it? Oh my gosh, my in-laws are watching me. Can I pay my bills? Can I buy the new house? What about how am I going to put the kids through college? And I don't mean to be sexist, but you're right. Women's stories a lot of times are about worth. Men's stories a lot of times are about ability.
Yes, and thank you, because that was not where I was going with that either. But yeah, that's it. It's just different stories. It's all stories, but different stories. And that was something that I dealt with, and a lot of my friends deal with. And now they're just stories. They don't have to become chains.
I was going to ask you right there, so we'll wrap this up. And you've done, hopefully people listening have said, you know what, I can see myself in Katie. If somebody said, Katie, give me your biggest piece of advice. And this is not about the transformational coaching program. Let's take something you learned. What is your biggest piece of advice to help me today, Katie, that you used that transformed you? And take your time, seriously.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Can I give two?
Sure, of course. Yeah, okay. Absolutely.
My first one would be, this was the biggest thing for me. There's so many big things. This is hard. This is hard, Jim. I'm on the spot and it's hard. Okay. No, that's a story. It's a story that it's hard.
Yeah.
It's that you cannot control anything. So you can't, if you've done horrible things in the past, you cannot control. I mean, that's what it is. So your past is what it is. And you can't control when things are done to you. And when bad things or bad situations happen to you, you cannot control that. You can control how you react. You can respond. Yes. Yeah. You can choose to react or respond in a way that's healthy for you or in a way that's destructive.
That's powerful because most of us go through life reacting to life.
Right.
Which is what you were doing when we first started, reacting to everything around you. And then victim mentality, because they did that and my husband did this and my mother did this. Well, then therefore I am angry. Let me add there for a second for people listening. I was watching this young couple, boyfriend and girlfriend. They were about 24 years old. And he said to her, he was angry. And I heard him say to her, he goes, "Don't get mad at me because I'm mad. You're the one who made me mad." And my thought was, you know what? He doesn't even understand that she didn't make him mad. She did what she did. He chose to interpret it the way that he interpreted it, which actually then allowed him to become mad. And then he blamed her for him being mad. He had zero responsibility in his own emotions and his own feelings and his own thoughts, and then blamed her, which is complete victim mentality. So
Totally.
everyone listening, no one does anything to you in terms of your emotions or your thoughts.
Right.
They do what they do. You choose to interpret as you interpret. We must be 100% responsible for that, which Katie has become. Secondly, you said two things. That was one.
So the second thing is just from my heart to anybody listening. And I don't know, for everybody, it's not always like a physical issue with thinking that you're not attractive, or
Right.
with the body, issues that we have in our society and our culture today for women or men. That's not just women, that deal with that.
Men too.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So whether it's physical with your body or whether it's about you as a person, like if your story includes divorce or abuse or infertility or whatever your story is, just understanding and knowing and accepting in your heart and really, really understanding that you are beautiful just as you are. And you don't have to take on those things forever. Those things, whether it's, again, whether it's your body image or these things that have happened to you or that you've done, that you don't have to live in those forever. They don't have any power. And we spend a lot of our life thinking that they have power. And I just would say that people are just beautiful, beautiful humans trying to be humans. And I just would want to say that.
Thank you very, very much. And yes, I agree. And I want to add there is that, Katie, if you go back and you watch this or you listen, your biggest takeaway in our time together is that you have I'm going to use the word, you have mastered your stories. Listening to this, everyone listening, she said the word stories about 87,000 times, which is great because guess what? No, she fully gets that everything in her life is a story. And if she's not getting what she wants, the health, the wealth, the money, relationships, it doesn't have anything to do with the external world. It has to do with what stories are you telling yourself. No,
Right.
I mean, you get an A++ for that. Everything comes to stories.
Well, and the thing is, Jim, is that what's cool is once you get the weight of, oh my God, I'm responsible for everything in my life. That's a week of adjustment. If in TCP, that's a week going, oh my God, this was me the whole time, and moving out of that victim mentality. But
Wait. I'm going to interrupt you, and I am interrupting for time also, is I want to clarify I'm responsible for everything in my life. That does not mean we are responsible for everyone in our life.
Correct. And that was a huge part of my journey, as
Hang
you
on,
know.
hang on, because I want to make sure. So if you have minor children, you are responsible for them. But what I mean is you're not responsible for the adults in your life.
Right.
Okay, Katie, keep on going.
Yeah, so my point was that once you realize that that's kind of that weight sits in of like, oh my gosh, I'm this person, I can be responsible. Then back to my favorite word, you get to write new stories. And there's just an empty notebook sitting in front of you to create whatever you want to create. And that goes back to that fear of control too, because to me, learning that I couldn't control things, that was part of my mental health journey and my physical health journey, but also with my business. If people are out there, doing things in the world with their company or their business and changing the world, and somebody rejects you, you can't control that, but move on. Like, just keep going.
And
Don't
let me add there.
attach a story.
Yeah, no, that's very good advice. And let me add there for people listening. Some people might say, well, aren't you controlling your health? No, you're making choices about what you choose to think, which will affect what you feel. You're making choices about your health, but you're not controlling your health.
Right.
So I want to be very clear about that distinction.
Yep.
All right. Anything else you want to add?
Just thank you.
Okay. It's absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. And thank you so much, Katie, for sharing this, because I know that a lot of people listening will, hopefully they'll get from you. I mean, this is phenomenal. Hopefully they will get that wherever we are in life is a reflection of our stories. And if we want something else in life, we have to change our stories. And the way we change our stories is, one of the ways is, well, conscious, just being aware of your stories. But secondly, the unconscious reprogramming and reprogramming ourselves at a unconscious level. Right. Katie, you're awesome. A big hug to you, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay, bye-bye. Okay, so this wraps up my conversation with Katie. And I think it's obvious after listening to Katie that you can heal yourself. I mean, this is ancient wisdom, and it's, ancient wisdom has said it for thousands of years, but even, recent and current medical research proves that we can heal ourselves with the power of our mind. Many years ago, I heard Deepak Chopra literally say that the greatest pharmacy in the world is right between your two ears. And working with my brother-in-law, the shaman, for over 20 something years now, this is something that he talks about extensively, literally the pharmacy of the mind, and he calls it the factory of the mind. And he talks about how that every thought that we have creates a response in the cells in our body. So we have to be careful with toxicity and toxic thinking because quite literally it's not just thinking because we're an entire organism. And when we have toxic and negative thinking and anger and resentment and jealousy and all these counterproductive and negative emotions, that literally affects the health of our cells. Actually, not sales as in sales, but cells as in cells in the body. Okay, you've also heard me say it in every episode that I'm starting a training on September the 4th. So please, whatever you do, mark the calendar and we'll release the date here pretty quickly. But I'm going to do a 3-part training for you. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a framework to all these episodes that I've been bringing to you. I'm going to put a transformational framework together for you and help you better understand and actually show you how you can start applying this for even quicker and better results in your life. All right, the next episode. The next episode is on a concept that I actually, I teach in my transformational program. And there was a Harvard business professor that did studies on this for a couple of years. And what he found is by us actually, this is a characteristic and way of being, by us demonstrating this actually way of being, this characteristic, this way of being, what he found is that we can increase our productivity anywhere from 1 to 400% with no additional input from anything else. And he also said that this is one of the most overlooked characteristics and ways of being in business. But not only that, it's one of the most overlooked ways in your personal life. And this is what I tell people is that nothing, meaning working out, dieting, achieving your goals, whatever, nothing is going to work, which when you listen to this episode, it'll be crystal clear to you. Nothing in your life is going to work until you embrace and you embody this characteristic and way of being. So, that being said, I'll catch you on the next episode. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to this entire podcast. If you're the kind of person who likes to help others, then share this with your friends and family. If you found value, they will too. So please share via your social media channels. Also, if you have questions, I'm here to assist. You can email me questions to support@jimfortin.com, and I may even use your question for a future podcast episode. Also, if you want transformational content like this daily, connect with me on Instagram. My Instagram name is I am Jim Fortin. Finally, I do have a personal request. I believe that we're all here to help others and to grow and evolve ourselves. Together, you and I, let's help more people. If you would please leave a review on iTunes, and a good one by the way. I'd be grateful, and through your assistance together, we can transform more lives. Thanks for listening.